Hello, everybody. How you doing?
Hello, Senator Grassley.
I always open with just a few remarks, but just so you feel comfortable, I want to say that I'm here to answer your questions, let you set the agenda. So any question, I've never had an inappropriate question, I think, from any high school students, so you don't need to worry about asking a question that might be inappropriate or something that would embarrass me or something like that. So I'm open to any of those kind of questions. But before you do that, when I'm in Iowa, instead of being in Washington, D.C. on a weekday, I always like to say that this is Wednesday. Most Wednesdays I'm in Washington, but when we have a national holiday like Wednesday was, or Monday was the President's holiday, then usually we have that week off. So that's when I take an opportunity to have my county meetings, because I go to every county every year, and maybe about 15 of those are high school like you are. Because I never get, when I'm at the courthouse down here or someplace else for an open town meeting, I never get young people like you to come to my town meetings. So I try to go to a few high schools every year to keep in touch with what younger people are thinking, just like older people that come to my town meetings. So we aren't in session this week, so I'm doing my annual tour of the counties. And I'm in 5 counties today, 4 yesterday, 3 Friday, and then next Sunday I'll go back to Washington, D.C. for our usual work in Washington, D.C. So before you ask questions, then I like to tell when I go to a high school, I like to tell you when you go to college, and most of you will go to higher education someplace, I have a college intern program. So if your mom and dad would let you come to Washington, D.C. and live for 3 months, during the fall I have 7 college interns, during the spring 7, and then during the summer, as you might expect, we have so many applicants that we have 2 6-week sessions. So over the course of a year, about 25 to 30 young people like you get a chance to come and work in the senator's office and learn government by experience. So if you could add approximately 30 times the 40 years that I've been in the United States Senate, you can see probably 1,000 or more people have had an opportunity to do that. And probably 2/3 of my staff in Washington, D.C. are people that were interns in my office. Then the last thing would be to tell you that we're face-to-face now to have a conversation, but most of my conversation comes with constituents through email. So that's, if you're interested in that, there's a form on grassley.senate.gov to communicate with me, or my speeches and my press releases are on there. You can follow me on Twitter at Chuck Grassley, at Instagram at Senator Chuck Grassley. I don't do my Facebook, my staff does that, but it also is another place where you can communicate with us as well. So we're going to have two-way communication as I answer your questions now, but we can have two-way communication if you email me, because I promise to answer every email. And if you don't get an answer, you can email me a nasty comment why I didn't answer your email. And by the way, you know, right now, it may sound like I don't answer my email at all if I told you my report from yesterday was that we were 18,000 behind. But sometimes we've been a lot more than that behind. And probably on average, if you get in like yesterday about 2,200, you can assume, well, at least you're going to always have that kind of a mail to communicate back with. So I always make a joke out of it. If you email me in the morning, don't expect an answer by 12:15 that afternoon. So that's how we keep up most of our two-way communication, because if you're going to represent people like me, representing all of you and 3 million other Iowans, you got to know what's on their mind. So that's why I try to travel Iowa when we aren't in session. Okay, now it's your opportunity, and let me ask the teacher, did you assign somebody to ask questions, or just anybody?
Whoever wants to.
So I can call on anybody I want to.
We'll have questions.
And yesterday, when I was in Jessup with high school students, there was a couple times I misinterpreted your question. Now, sometimes my staff will step in and said, this is what they wanted to know. So maybe if I start down the road and not understanding your question, stop me. Who wants to be first?
Raise your hand if you have a question.
Sure, I'll
Okay,
go.
sure enough.
All right, so can you explain why you voted against witnesses in the impeachment hearings?
Yes, yeah, very much so. It's kind of like following the pattern of three previous presidents being impeached, Johnson after the Civil War, Nixon in the 1970s, although we didn't have a trial for him. I wasn't in the Congress then. We didn't have a trial for him because he resigned, and then Clinton, and I was there for the Clinton one. And in each of those cases, the House of Representatives found that he had violated laws. In the case of Johnson after the Civil War, he was firing cabinet people without getting the permission of the Senate. That's no longer a requirement, but back then it was. Nixon had friends of his invade Watergate to check on or to get stuff on the Democrats, and then he tried to cover up a crime. And Clinton lied to a grand jury, and that's a felony. So they had all violated crimes. The House of Representatives, in the case of Trump, didn't charge him with any crime. They went through a process of calling witnesses, and they didn't call all the witnesses that they could have called, and yet they came to the Senate and said, we have proved beyond a doubt certain things. Well, he wasn't charged with anything. So you go to the Constitution, as you probably have read. The Constitution says for treason, bribery, high crimes, and misdemeanors. And this is the first president that's been impeached that has been charged with a crime. So what was the point in calling witnesses? The same ones that the House had subpoenaed and then withdrew the subpoena. So the House was not doing their job to prepare a good case for the Senate, for us as jurors to go through. So that's why we didn't call witnesses. But we did have 24 hours of prosecution. In other words, the House members come over and they serve as prosecutors. We had 3 8-hour days of that. The president's defense could have had the same 24 hours, 3 days. They only used 2 days, I think. And then we had 2 8-hour days of any members of the Senate asking questions. There were 90 questions answered. And then after that, 80 or 90 hours, whatever it adds up to, we in turn had then 2 days of debate among the senators themselves. And then they called the roll on 2 articles of impeachment. And he answered guilty or not guilty. Just like if you are on a jury for a criminal case down here at the courthouse, you would sit there and listen for hours and hours and decide guilty or not guilty. 100 senators did the same thing for about 90 hours and then made up their mind, did he do something that was impeachable? He surely did things that were not right. But to preempt an election or to go against the voters' right to choose a president, particularly just a few months before the next election, and no crime being charged, that's how it ended up then. as the Chief Justice said, acquittal. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay, next question. Yes?
Why did you advise Trump not to testify at the trial?
Trump not to testify, I don't think, at least I was part of Clinton and part of, and all of, well, I was all of Clinton and all of this one, and presidents don't testify. Okay, next question. Yeah,
Do you support term limits for congressmen, and how do you see these being?
you'll have to talk louder.
Do you support term limits for congressmen, and how do you see these being
Oh,
implemented?
term limits. Yeah. In the years I've been in the United States Senate, we've had a constitutional amendment once to have term limits, and I voted yes on it. I'd say it got about, I'd have to go back because it's been quite a few years since we had that vote. But let's say somewhere between 50 and 55 senators voted for term limits. And I was one of them. But when you amend the Constitution, it takes a 2/3 vote, or 67 votes, to get a constitutional amendment out to the states. And it didn't get the 2/3 vote, and it's never come up for a vote since then. Okay, next question. Yes, could you speak real loud,
I'll
please?
stand up. My question is, there was a lot of news, of course, yesterday with all the announcements of the Trump pardons, including Blagojevich, the former governor of Illinois.
Yeah.
Supposedly sold a seat, Obama Senate seat, for the highest bidder. Can you comment on either that one or any of the pardons from yesterday, and tell me what your thoughts are about that? Did you support those? And kind of just talk about the pardons a little bit.
Well, yes. This is one of the few places where under the Constitution, the president has complete power. No president's going to do this, but if a president of the United States wanted to go to all the federal prisons in the United States and pardon everybody under the Constitution, he can do it and it would be on question. So that's what he was doing, is exercising powers of pardon and powers of what we call commutation, which in the case of the former governor of Illinois, I think it was a commutation and not a pardon.
Correct.
But the president exercised it, so it doesn't say that, like a pardon would say, well, the slate's wiped clean. You aren't guilty of anything anymore. In commutation, you're still guilty, but you aren't, his sentence is reduced, or in his case, where he was let out of prison. Okay, next question. Yes.
So, for me, I think one of the biggest problems in like today's like government is just how like polarized it is.
Yes.
So, do you think there's like a way to fix that, or do you think it like needs fixed at all?
Yeah, it does need to be fixed. The question is on partisanship. And the partisanship is worse now than it's ever been. But there's always been partisanship, because I've had an opportunity to watch George Washington through the Revolutionary War 3 nights now on, not on public television, the History Channel. And they didn't really call them political parties during George Washington's term. They called them factions. And everybody was so united when the Constitution was written. And I don't know whether people really thought that there would be political parties. But before his 8 years were up, the country was tremendously divided. And one of the historians last night said, "We think it's bad today." This historian said it was worse during Washington's administration. It continued during Adams, and it even got worse during Jefferson's administration. Now that's all history, but at least you got one historian living today that has studied history in depth more than I ever have, and probably most of you folks ever will. We think it's very bad now, but with nothing compared to what it was then. Only then it was done through the newspapers. Now it's done through social media, through all the talk shows, through all of the cable television, and through some print media, and it just gets out there faster than it did in those days. So let me, first of all, let me set the record straight, something you can check on that I'm going to tell you. Senator Lugar, now dead, but was a longtime senator from Indiana, he set up a Lugar Institute at Georgetown University. So you go to that index, in the last 4 or 5 years, they put out an index of 100 senators for do they tend towards bipartisanship and working across lines, or do they just simply never cooperate with the other political party? And you'll find my coming up about 4th, 5th, or 6th in those surveys over a 3 or 4 year period of time, so you can go back and check it for yourself. So there is something that's different about the House and the Senate. I think nothing is going to get done in the United States Senate if there isn't some part of bipartisanship. Now, that doesn't mean that there's not too much partisanship, so I'm not backing off of that because it's not good. But when you have to have 60 votes and you have 53 Republicans and 47 Democrats, if you got to have 60 votes to get to finality, you're never going to get anything done if you don't have some bipartisanship. In the next few months, you'll be reading about me and Senator Wyden, a Democrat from Oregon, working to get drug prices down. Okay, we've been working together on that a year. We don't agree a whole lot. I mean, he may be 90% liberal, I may be 90% conservative, so we don't have, but when there's things that you gotta work together on, you get together on. And it doesn't mean that you have antagonism towards each other on the things you disagree on, because you can learn to disagree agreeably, you know. So in the House, so that's different than the House of Representatives. If you're a Republican majority, now it's a Democrat majority, but either way, as long as the majority sticks together, you can ignore the minority. But you can't ignore the minority in the United States Senate. And so that's just kind of my explanation. If you want an answer about what to do about it, it may sound like a joke, but there's a lot of truth to it. How do you eat 10,000 marshmallows? You eat one at a time. How are you going to reduce partisanship in the United States Congress or in government generally? You're going to have to do it one senator at a time, I think. So I'm not saying that it's bad, and I'm 86 years old. It probably won't get a lot better in my lifetime, but it's still going to change. But again, look at the history of it. What I told you, the historian said last night on television, it was worse during George Washington, Adams, and Jefferson's time than it is now. Okay, next question. You ask a big question. Do you have a follow-up?
No, I think
Okay,
that was very
next question then. Because if I don't answer your question fully, you will not insult me if you have a follow-up. Okay,
Hey,
who's
my
next?
students who've written down 3 questions each, you guys should all have your hands up right now. That's
Okay.
my expectation.
I guess you're telling them what to do, right?
Do it now. My students.
Okay,
each
go
raise
ahead.
up. Let's
So
go.
who do you think has a possible chance in the 2020 election against Trump?
It's really difficult. And I may give you a different answer tomorrow than I do today because there's a big debate tonight.
Yeah.
And I don't watch a lot of Democrat debates, but I think this one I'm going to watch. I assume you folks all know I'm a Republican, so I didn't even say that. But I think I'm going to watch tonight because I want to watch how Bloomberg performs. But assuming that what you're asking me, what I know today, I think Sanders is going to be the nominee of the party. I think they'd be smart if they nominated Klobuchar, myself, but then I'm not a member of that party. Next question. Yes.
We have been taught that history goes around in a cylinder as some events similarly repeat themselves over time. In all of your years, have you seen or experienced any of that?
Yeah. I think I've seen if I was looking at, I suppose I ought to be telling you about the Republican Party. I don't know whether I can answer your question without referring to the Democrat Party. But the Democrat Party, well, no, this would be true of the Republican Party. I'm going to talk about free trade. Democrats tended before the World War II to be free traders, and Republicans were protectionists. Then after World War II, Republicans became more free traders and Democrats more protectionists. And it's still pretty much that way, but I think you're seeing Republicans turn towards protectionism to some extent. Now that's almost an 80-year history I gave you, and maybe that really doesn't answer your question because you might expect things to change, but maybe if your question would be regard to the last 10 years, then I wouldn't have any examples. Okay, next question. Yeah.
You mentioned your work on healthcare costs. As I look at our population here, one of the things that is going to occur for many of these people is a huge amount of college or vocational debt. Can you talk on your thoughts on how we can help these people get through that next phase of their life?
Right now, a couple bills I have in is to encourage you not to get in debt any more than you have to go to college. So this started about 5 or 6 years ago when there was a president of the University of Iowa, Sally Mason. She would come to my office once a year and we'd talk about college debt. Then the average debt was about $29,000. She said if people only borrowed what they needed for tuition, room and board, and books, they'd have $1,000. At one time I thought she said $13,000 less debt, but I'm not sure I want to keep repeating that. But considerably less debt than they'd otherwise have. So why? Well, the federal law requires the persons that you talk to at the college that you might call a financial advisor, or anybody that's maybe even your local guidance counselor here, tells you how much you can borrow to go to college, because they have to tell you the maximum you can borrow. So the federal government really has a policy of encouraging you to get in debt more than you need to get in debt to get a college degree. So my bill would do away with that requirement. And I call it NO, K-N-O-W, no before you owe, O-W-E. So you ought to think in terms of not borrowing more money than you need to borrow. And then if you can, when you're a freshman, look ahead 4 years. Is what you're majoring in going to be able to help you pay off that debt? And the other bill that I have in, if you're, let's say you're going to go to Wartburg or you're going to go to Grinnell, they got different forms, so when you compare the bottom line of the cost of Grinnell versus the cost of Wartburg, it's comparing apples with oranges. And so I think we need a uniform form to fill out. So when you look at the bottom line and you compare it to the quality of education you're going to get, you're comparing oranges with oranges, not oranges and apples. So that's one thing. Now, there's some advice I can give you about any debt you might accumulate. If you get out, you want to sign up to pledge a certain portion of your income every year to pay off your debt, and at the end of 20 years, you don't have it paid off, then I think under existing law, that's forgiven. Or another way is if you work for a nonprofit organization, then I think for 10 years, whatever you would owe in 10 years would be forgiven. I don't think that forgives all the debt though, but some of it. Things like that you can consider some of those things as you think about it. But I would implore you, don't borrow any more money than you need to go to whatever it takes to get to college. Okay, next thing.
I'm just going to piggyback off of that. So, talk about how Bernie Sanders might become the nomination and all, and he talks about like college for all, making it basically free. Do you think if he becomes president that would happen at all? Especially with how parties are polarized right now?
I think it'd be very difficult, at least for 4 years of college to be free, but I'm not so sure about what it would be easy to get a community college degree. The thing you got to think about, this help is all for public universities. So if you started making it free to go to all these public universities, you just close down a lot of private universities. So that would be very unfair competition. Next question. In other words, would you want Ortberg to shut down because some president comes along and says he's going to give you free tuition? Okay. Yes, ma'am.
You said that you think Bernie Sanders would be most likely to win against Trump as a nominee. Why do you think that?
I thought I was answering the question that he would be the nominee. I don't think I didn't mean to infer that he could be elected president, but I think that he would be the one. In other words, everybody seems to think, and I haven't studied the 2016 election, but that Trump was able to get a lot of people who either didn't vote or voted I'm talking about in past elections, either didn't vote or voted Democrat and went over to Trump. That's how he elected. That he stirred up people that really were not politically active in 2016. Sanders did that in 2016, but didn't get the nomination. He's still doing it. He has a very faithful following and can even probably broaden that, see? And so it kind of puts in place a person running the Democrat Party that maybe brings people out that somebody, I even mentioned Klobuchar as being a good candidate, but she may not have the ability to stir people up like he does. But I didn't mean to imply that that meant if Sanders got nominated that he was going to be he would become president. I think in these days, and particularly with somebody like Trump that's so unpredictable, you just better not make any bets on it. But I can make clear, I should make clear for you as a Republican, and particularly with the economy, that the Trump program has brought about the lowest unemployment in 50 years, growth of the economy more than we had in the previous 8 years by probably 50%. What he's done in a lot of areas, particularly when, I think most candidates run on a platform, they don't necessarily stand on that platform. But I think, and this can't be 100% of what he promised that he's been able to carry out, but it seems to me that he's working hard to do in office what he said he was going to do as a candidate. And so I think that he's a very strong candidate, and obviously if I left any doubt in your mind, I'd like to see him re-elected. Next question. Yeah, yes. Either one of you two.
Okay. Do you believe increased defense spending is a good use of money, and why?
Well, we ended up for 2 years in, let's see, 18 and 19, and then for 19 and 20, because of ISIS now, which is kind of destroyed, but there was a real cutback on defense expenditures from, let's say, from 2006 to about 2000, well, heavens, so about 2017. And then ISIS rose, and now they're hopefully destroyed, but I know you can't ever be sure of that. We felt we need to spend more on defense expenditures. So I was one of those that felt that. In fact, a lot of Democrats felt that as well. But then we ended up with an agreement, if you're going to spend X number of dollars more on defense, you have to spend X dollars more on domestic programs. So that's kind of the policy that was adopted for 18 and 19. And then in 19, we decided to carry that same policy through 20 and 21. So the budget that you read that the president put out this year probably won't be very controversial or a lot of debate about it, because it kind of extends, Congress, well, the president's proposed something different than what we'll end up passing, because that's what he would like to do, but he proposes we dispose, and then in the end, Congress is kind of going to stick to, for now 2021, what we're doing in 2020, because last year, just before Christmas, we made a decision for 2 fiscal years. Okay, and you had a question, young lady.
What actions do you think as a state or country can we do to reduce waste for global warming, and what actions have you taken?
Okay, that's a very important question, and very much a part of, particularly in the Democratic debate going on right now. And so let me give you my background, and then I'll answer your question. Because I think what I've been doing for 30 years is having some success now. And there's only one area where I'll claim leadership, but I've been involved in all sorts of alternative energy. The one area I'll claim leadership in is in 1992, I got the wind energy tax credit passed. So that's why you got wind turbines around Charles City now. And from there all the way up to northwest Iowa, we get about 38% of our electricity from clean energy, wind, renewable, never ends, et cetera, et cetera. Averaging 14 miles an hour northwest Iowa. As you get down here, maybe 12 miles an hour. As you get to southeast Iowa, about 8 miles an hour. So we got plenty of energy, and we're taking advantage of it. You'll have mid-America in 5 or 6 years. At least they're bragging now. We'll see if it turns out this way. But they're going to get about 85 to 90% of their energy from wind. So I've been involved in biofuels, ethanol, biofuels, which is cleaner burning than gasoline, and solar, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm always say 4 things about an energy program. Number one, for quite a few years, we're still going to have to use fossil fuels. Then all the alternative energy you can have. And then hydrogen, which is not hydrogen, nuclear, which is the cleanest of all. And then, of course, the extent to which you and I as individuals can conserve, or governments make us have different light bulbs or more efficient refrigerators, stuff like that, to conserve. So to answer your question now, because that's my background, to answer your question, everything that we're doing and we're going to continue to do, we have no, at this trend towards cleaner burning energy, we have no desire to change any of that as we phase out of one and phase into another. And that phasing in's been going on for 20 or 30 years and will go on for a long time in the future. Basically, we need to continue to do what we're doing, because we have our greenhouse gases in the air, or that we put out, down to the 2005 level. Now, can we do better? Yeah, we can probably do better. But here's where we are. we're 22 or 23% of the world's economy, the United States is. We put 13% of the greenhouse gases into the air. China is 15% of the world's economy. They put 30% of the greenhouse gases in the air. And India, there's a figure for India, and there's a figure for Indonesia, and there's a figure for Brazil. What we have to do is get the rest of the world to do what we're doing, see? Now, I don't often quote Sanders, but recently I read a response that he gave to somebody asking the same question you're asking me. And this is not a direct quote, but kind of paraphrasing. He says, if we ended all the greenhouse gases that we're putting in the air right now, it would be very insignificant compared to what has to be done by China and India and Indonesia and Brazil, et cetera, et cetera. And so his position is, we keep on doing what we're doing, but we got to get the rest of the world to do what we're doing. See? Does that help you, or you got a follow-up?
Yeah, I have a follow-up. So you talk about greenhouse gases, but America is one of the top trash producers in the world.
Okay. Well, that's a legitimate question, although I never get kind of trash compared to the greenhouse gases. China has kind of screwed that up for us because, boy, we could take everything we recycle and send it to China. Recently, for some reason, I don't know what it is. For instance, recycling, besides living in New Hartford for 86 years, I also have a home in Virginia. And we just got word that we can't put glass in our blue barrels because glass doesn't have any value anymore, and they want us to sort that out and take it to another place in town instead of having the trash collectors come around and pick it up, because they can grind it up and put it in asphalt, as an example. But it doesn't have as much value as they used to, and they can't have the expense of sorting it out, as one example. So I don't really have much of an answer for you except recycle and recycle and recycle. Everything you can. 2 or 3 times at my farm, 2 or 3 times a year, I load up the car and take it into New Hartford and put it in these big bins, and somebody from the county comes around and gets it and takes it to some place to be recycled. So all I can say is, when I was let's say I was married a few years on the farm, we used to burn everything, take stuff out and burn everything. We don't do that anymore. So just keep it up, I guess, is the best I can answer your question. Unless you got a more specific question you want to ask me.
No, that's good.
Okay, next question. Yes?
With war and tragedy all over the world, and as people try to immigrate to the U.S., there are a lot of issues with gaining citizenship. So how are you trying to change and reform the ways we allow refugees and new dreamers into the U.S.?
Okay. I didn't hear much what you said, but I think I got the question. You want to know about what we're going to do about immigration?
Yes, sir.
Is that simple?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Well, one reason is I don't have hearing aids, but I think I got your question right. First of all, I think as long as we're always talking about undocumented immigrants, or you can call them illegal immigrants if you want to. And the reason you call them illegal immigrants is because that's what the law calls them. Whether it's right or wrong, that's the term. You're using a legal term when you say people have come to this country illegally. So let's be very clear to start off with. The United States is more of a welcoming nation than any other country in the world for immigrants. Because every year, we get somewhere between 900,000 and 1 1/10 million people come to this country legally, and we want them to come. And that's kind of the best answer I can give to your question, is that we welcome immigration, but we don't welcome people that violate our laws to come here. So if you cross the border without papers and permission to come to this country, because every country's got a right to tell, I mean, we got 190 countries in the world, on this globe, and every one of those countries have the right to admit or not admit whoever they want to. So we do more than any other country, welcoming people legally. But if people violate our laws, we're a country based on the rule of law, we don't do that. Now, exceptions to that would be people seeking asylum, but they're coming here legally if they get to be classified as an asylee, or a refugee, if they get classified as a refugee and can come to the country. They may be coming, they're coming here illegally, but it's kind of the people you're talking about, because I think part of your question was, when there's problems around the world, then shouldn't we be a welcoming country? And we are, but within the limits of what we can do, and within the limits of the law we have. But for somebody down in Central America to say, well, we're going to put 3,000 people together in a caravan and just invade the United States, you can't allow that to happen, or pretty soon you'd have no respect for law at all. See? Okay, is that?
Yeah.
Okay, next question. Yes?
Yesterday, I looked at your Twitter account, and could you explain more on your views about the Stowe lying to investigators and McCabe also lying to investigators?
Okay, can the teachers repeat that?
Yeah, so yesterday when we were researching, I said, hey, check out the Senator Grassley's Twitter account. So she went to your tweet that was from yesterday, where you talked about Roger Stone lying to investigators, but then you made the comparison to McCabe lying to investigators, and so she was curious about your views on that.
Can you read that to me?
Yeah. It was from over the weekend.
It's the one where I was trying to make a case between what happened in the Obama administration.
Yes.
Yeah, she was curious about that comparison.
Yeah. And it's in regard to, it's more about Barr than it is about Stone.
Yep.
Yeah, okay. Here's,
Hey, and then for you guys who do not know, William Barr is our current Attorney General.
yeah, okay. So then, without having to read it to me, because I think I remember what I punched in there. There's criticism of Barr that he's doing all this stuff because of the president. 2 points I want to make. As I see the thing in regard to Stone, and then I'm going to say why it's wrong to criticize Barr, even if he did it, and I don't think that he did anything wrong compared to other things that seem to be the same, didn't seem to raise the same criticism in the previous administration. Number one, first of all, remember, courts have overturned this president 30 times already, and they overturned probably Obama 50 or 60 times. So as long as you have an independent judiciary and the judge is going to make the decision, we got judges that are judges. We don't have politicians that are robes. They don't have to pay any attention to what the president said, as long as you got an independent judiciary, and we do. The second thing is, according to what I heard Barr himself say, that he made a decision Sunday night, which would be a week ago Sunday night, that he looked at what they were doing and that it didn't look like it was legitimate, or I mean fair, or something like that. It didn't mean that the guy wasn't guilty. I think everybody agrees he's guilty. Is it going to be 9 years, or 5 years, or 4 years? Well, I don't know what it's going to be, but at least Barr thought 9 years was wrong. So he started action the night before the president even tweeted. And then he was on television 2 days later saying he's not going to be bullied by anybody, including the president of the United States. Okay, now let's just suppose, this is what I answered student in Anamosa last week. Let's just suppose that he is in cahoots with the president on this thing. How is that any different than Holder telling the American people that he was a wingman for Obama? A wingman for Obama. Now the Attorney General, whether it's Barr or whether it's Holder, is supposed to be an Attorney General for the people of the United States. So that's basically my tweet.
Yeah, and then the other aspect is that you were comparing people who have like lying to Congress or lying to the DOJ investigators what is a crime, and so everyone should be treated equally if it's a Trump person or a non-Trump person.
Yeah, okay. I think I don't need to repeat that, but I think you heard it all. Okay, next question. Yeah.
So you kind of mentioned like factions and stuff.
Yeah.
And
That's what they called them at George Washington's time, instead of political parties.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so like we just talked about like interest groups.
Yeah.
So do you think like really powerful interest groups like NRA or whatever it be, do you think they hold too much sway within like Congress?
Yeah. Yeah. But they don't. Let's put it this way. Maybe I shouldn't agree to the word too much sway, but they have a big voice. But that big voice, let's say in the case of the NRA, is balanced against the big voice of what you might call anti-gun people. Or let's say, I'm fighting the big pharmaceutical companies right now on reducing drug pricing. They are probably a more powerful force than even the NRA. But there's consumer groups out there, like the AARP is backing my bill, as an example. And so you've got 42 million people in the AARP. I hope that their voice is louder than, let's say, 25 big pharmaceutical companies. But here's what you got to look at as you look at the power of lobbying groups. First of all, every one of your teachers up here, I'll bet, are members of the Iowa State Education Association, and in turn, they're members of the National Education Association, and that's a powerful voice when it comes to education. See, a very powerful voice. So you got to look at the First Amendment, and usually we talk about freedom of speech, freedom of religion, and freedom of press, but the freedom of association, or the way it's written in the First Amendment, the right to petition your government for redress of grievances. That basically means that you as an individual have a constitutional right to talk to me, and I don't necessarily have to agree with you, but I ought to at least consider your opinion. So then let's say that you're a teacher, but you can't live in Washington, D.C. talking to Chuck Grassley all the time. You can email me as a member, but you can also hire people in your office in Washington, D.C. that comes to Capitol Hill and say, this is what the teachers of Iowa or the teachers of the United States think about this educational law or that educational law. They may even be taking a position on the environment. They may be taking a position on something else, but most of it is on education. So you pay dues to hire somebody else because you can't be doing it every day. So it's a constitutional protection you have, see, and you gotta, and I always tell people, if a lobbyist is worth their money, that let's say, I'll just say the NEA lobbyists, and I can't even name who they are, but there's plenty of them around town. Rather than them coming and talking to me, it'd be better if they told all the teachers in this room, send them an email and said, you ought to get a hold of Grassley and tell him that he ought to vote this way or that way. Because I'm more apt to listen to my constituents than I am some lobbyists. Although I think the majority of the people in Iowa think we don't listen to them, we only listen to lobbyists. And there may be 100 different answers to that, but I'm giving you my answer to it. Okay. Does that answer your question? Okay. Yes, Wayne. Yeah.
First of all, before I ask the question, my uncle Gene agrees as well.
No kidding.
Yeah.
Okay.
You want to say hello to?
Sure.
I know you know him really well.
Yes.
But my question is, cameras in the courtroom, I know on your website you've been a big advocate of
Yeah.
cameras in the courtroom. Aside from the Supreme Court, I believe is correct, but I don't know if that's true or not.
For all courts. All federal courts.
All federal courts.
Yeah, because 46 states already allow cameras in
Can
the
you
court.
talk about why you're such a big advocate
Yeah.
of cameras in the courtroom?
Yeah. I was probably an opponent in 1984 to Congress being on C-SPAN. Now I think that that's one of those votes that I made a mistake. I think if you can watch us on C-SPAN, we're going to have more responsible government. But it did do something I thought that would be bad as a result of it. You get a lot of people just wanting time on TV, maybe giving speeches that wouldn't otherwise have to be given in Congress and taking a little bit longer than maybe you have to take. But it'd be the same reason. There's a lot of mystery about courts and the judiciary branch of government. And I think that it would educate people about the judiciary. I think the judiciary has more respect than any other branch of our government today, but they would have even more respect if people understood it to a greater extent. And so that's why I'm in favor of it. But you know, the Chief Justice is very much against it. And if you go back to, since I'm President Pro Tem, you saw that I swore in the Chief Justice to preside over the criminal, not the criminal case, the case of the President's impeachment. And the weekend before I did it, I said, I hope that the Chief Justice, being on C-SPAN, gets comfortable with it enough that he would be in favor of my legislation to put cameras in the Supreme Court. Because he told me twice a year, I'm not chairman of the Judiciary Committee this year, I'm finance, but when I was, a couple times a year, you get invited to talk to the Supreme Court and the judges from around the country that they call the Judicial Conference. And one time, he told me that we'll have cameras in the Supreme Court over my dead body. So I tweeted that maybe he'd get used to it and be comfortable then with my bill. Next legislation.
We have time for one more question.
One more question. Yeah, go ahead.
There's no one else.
Oh,
All right, go ahead.
yeah,
So what do you expect to do about the gun violence in like learning environments?
yeah. Basically, your question is about gun violence and about legislation on guns
In learning environments.
and what?
In learning environments like schools.
Oh, yeah, I have a bill in on that. I'm not sure it's going to solve the problems. But that's the one we go by the acronym EAGLES?
Yeah.
Yeah. So if you want to go to my website and look up the acronym EAGLES, and that's named after that's for the school at Parkland. They're called the Eagles, right? The Parkland shooting in Florida 2 years ago. So what we have had a program in the federal government for, I imagine, 2 or 3 decades, where the Secret Service will, I suppose it's in other law enforcement, the Secret Service has seminars and schools of instruction and things like that, where they try to train people to be alert to somebody that may have a problem that would lead to violence, like guns. The extreme of it would be gun violence, but almost any kind of violence. And so the EAGLE legislation would also have the Secret Service do that for teachers. Because in the Parkland shooting, there was at least 30, not 40, but more than 30 examples of where the teachers or other people in the school tried to get the Parkland killer to some sort of mental health help. And so even without that training that my bill would do, there was teachers and other educators that recognized that this person had a problem and he needed help. And if he had been in a program to get him help, his name would have been in the FBI database, so you couldn't purchase a gun. Because people that are felons, domestic abuse, mental health, and maybe a couple others, you can't buy a gun. And he was able to, I think, legally purchase a gun. And so that's one solution I have in for it, but that's not really even the best answer to your question. The best answer to your question is that we've got to do something, not just because of gun violence, but, and in fact, the superintendent at Jessup brought this up to me yesterday, how we have so many issues with mental health among young people that we got to do something about it. And the something you got to do about it, we got to get more psychiatrists and more psychologists. But in America, we don't force you to go into this job or this profession or that profession. But that's a major problem we have, and solving that problem goes a long ways towards the issue you brought up. Because I don't know, in almost, at least in school shootings, but maybe even in other shootings as well, when you get diagnosing the people that have done that, you find out a lot of these people have mental problems. See, and we've got to do something about that. So listen, I didn't thank Charles City High School in the comments for giving me the privilege of being here, but thank you very much, whoever set it up with my staff, and you've been a very good audience, and I appreciate it, and maybe sometime some of you will be an intern in my office. Thank you very much. Goodbye.